Hello and welcome to the Womb-Centered Healing Podcast. Jessica Huckabee here, and with Antje as a guest. Thank you so much for joining us. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you may have heard previous times when Antje joined us on the podcast and talked about her Neurographica work. And it was such a delight this spring to work with Antje on a collaborative project combining the Neurographica therapeutic drawing process that she shares and the writing from the womb process focused on ancestral healing. So we're going to talk about that today, as those of you who are joining us for this ancestral healing series of podcasts. So this is all about that. And we got together to combine these two wonderful processes, and it was quite a potent and fruitful and healing experience. For myself, I can speak, but also I happen to know several of the participants, and perhaps even yourself, Antje, also felt that way for our own ancestral healing process. So, Antje, I'd love for you to introduce yourself a little bit more and perhaps do a brief introduction about what Neurographica is before we get into the nitty-gritty of how we're engaging with these processes for ancestral healing.
Okay, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me again.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Antje Howard. I am an artist and a teacher, and I share the Neurographica method. I'm originally from Germany, and I live in California now. So I'm far, far, far away from my original land, from my home, and far away from my family. And for me, this ancestral journey really kind of helped me to establish a closer connection to home, back home, now that I'm so far away, and back to my ancestors and my family. Maybe just as a very brief introduction, Neurographica is a method that was created by a Russian psychology professor. His name is Pavel Piskaryov. And he created a method that, in a way, combines concepts from psychology with art. So with the drawing process, we actually dive into our consciousness and dive down into the subconscious and unconscious layers. He created a process of 7 steps. It's very simple, yet really profound. And it's easy to learn. So we literally draw lines and very simple figures, circles most of the time, and we play with color. And with every step, the process allows us to go deeper into ourselves. And what happened for me when I first learned it was that I really realized that there are points in myself that I cannot reach with my brain, with my mind. Like, no matter how much I try or how much I talk about things, there are just places there that cannot be reached in these conscious ways. And with the process of drawing, we kind of dive into this subconscious layer. And because we work with shapes, very simple shapes and colors, we go into a place where it's like a place beyond words. This is like how I understand and how I explain it for myself, that I dive into a place that I could not explain in words, but there is a way to show it still, to experience it in these shapes and colors. And this is what we do with the ancestral drawings, because the way that ancestral work started and came up for me was that I kind of wanted to connect to a part of myself that I knew was in connection with my ancestors. So for me personally, my ancestral work is inner work completely. It doesn't really have to do with anything outside of me. I'm not, I mean, I can be okay with people believing that there's spirits or ghosts or whatever coming from the outside. But for me, ancestral work is really something that happens inside of me, and where my ancestors are connected with me through my inner layers of my own subconscious and of like my unconscious, like places that I cannot really consciously access, for example. Mm-hmm. So what the drawing can bring up is information from these layers. And because we bring it into this language of color, into this language of form and shape, we can see symbols, for example, in it. No, it has a lot to do with bringing out things that we, even like later, even like months later, I can look at a drawing that I made and I can see a new thing in it, and I can understand something a little bit more. And I can ask myself, what is this blue spot there? You know, and like things like that. And so I allow my mind to think about things in a different way that is non-linear, that's kind of not structured like we're usually thinking, but that kind of opens up to a new layer of my understanding. So that as a very short description.
Beautiful. Well, I can attest to, you know, the potency of, for me, just sitting down and drawing such simple structures and forms, but within a framework of inner inquiry and feeling, and just being able to express what can't be put into words in a very relaxed and relaxing way. You know, in our process, in our collaborative project focused on ancestral healing, with this process, we did a series of, I think it was four different themes or approaches, and we did a drawing process and a writing process on each one. And I will say Antje is going to do the whole series with the drawing process again, and I will have writing available to go with that, but it's not going to be as structured of a bundled thing. Yeah, we'll talk more about that later. But when we did do it with this very intentional, we're doing the drawing and the writing together. It was a very powerful combination, I find, because for me, writing into the kind of intuitive, meditative writing process that I do does a lot of the things that you're talking about, Antje, of really accessing the things. Like there's a way of writing that is coming from a different place, writing from the womb, okay? It's coming from a different place than the logical thinking mind, and it bridges the gap between that subconscious, that unconscious realm, and our conscious mind again, which is a big part of the healing processes that I do, because a lot of what our trauma does is that it disconnects our conscious thinking mind from our subconscious. And this kind of writing, and I think as well, the art of expressing it through color, like then it's connecting with the visuals. And then you're also like making meaning, right? You're saying, oh, this blue dot means this and that for me. And it actually bridges that disconnection. And so then when we take it into the writing and write about that blue dot, for example, so the writing is a great doorway in to, the drawing is a great doorway into bridging that gap so that we can express verbally what previously felt unexpressible, right? We can understand what was ununderstandable, what was not understandable for us previously. So that's where the healing happens, I feel, is when now I can understand something about myself that I couldn't connect with previously. And the drawing, and that's why that I just am so delighted that with this combination of the drawing and then the writing, because, you know, I have my own ways of facilitating that connection with the subconscious. We do visionary meditation, and we do that with the drawing as well. But the combination of the two really allowed us to go much deeper. And I thought we could share some of our experiences with that process, specifically around ancestral healing. And I'd just like to start, because before we did this series together focused on ancestral healing, we did a previous combination. And one of the drawings that we did in that one, you know, speaking of finding images in it, the face of an ancestor came in one of these drawings. And I don't know if you can see it, but here is her head. Here's her forehead and her eye and her nose and her lips and her cheek right there. And it's like, you know, this might be her shoulder and the rest of her body. And she's sort of looking off, sort of away from us to the side a little bit. And I was so involved in this drawing and in the process. I think this was the water. We were doing the elements, right? This was the water element, and I was just flowing with the process. And then suddenly she popped out, and it was so clear. And I knew exactly which ancestor this was, that she had arrived on in the flow of the water, right? And that there she was with a message. And so then the writing came from that place. And, you know, we don't always have like such a clear image, you know, that is recognizable. It may be more of a shape or a particular color combination or a dot or things like that. But yeah, that was just a very potent experience of, wow, this ancestor arrived. And that really inspired me to converse with you and to create this collaborative project, because that got us started talking about ancestors and how this process could support our exploration of our ancestry. So I'd love for you to share more about how you started working with ancestors and in this process.
So the first time I actually did a drawing that was addressing the ancestors was during my training. There is one drawing process that we do that's called the Ancestral Mandala. And it's like a whole course about mandalas. We do all kinds of different mandala type things there. And this course is very specifically geared towards harmonizing. We want to harmonize relationships, we want to harmonize ourselves, and we do that with this imagery of mandala. And the Ancestral Mandala, it's actually one of the versions I did is behind me, and it's the one that I like to have behind me because I feel that I have all my ancestors behind me. And in that drawing, we bring out 7 generations of ancestors in one picture. So as you can maybe see here, there's one in the center. That one is me, and then all the circles going out to the side, they get like smaller and more, and that's the 7 generations. So you can literally see yourself surrounded by 7 generations in this picture, and then you explore the picture, explore the connections with lines, with colors, with like different processes. When I first did that drawing, it took me to a really new place. I've have some experience with shamanic work, but that was really something that was spontaneous, completely spontaneous. I went like literally into a deep trance while I was drawing. And I had visions, I heard voices, I couldn't sleep the continuous 2 nights. I had like continuous visions and communicated with my ancestors, and I had extreme body sensations. This is one of the things that I really like about Neurographica. It's all about checking in. So while we draw, we always stay conscious of how does my body feel? Where are my emotions? Where does my mind go? So it's really like an active meditation. No, we always connect back to ourselves, to our body, and we always, with every line that we draw, we check in, how does this line feel to me? So that was like my first experience, and it was like blowing my mind. I was like, wow, this is crazy. And I decided to have it in a workshop because I felt that this needed a stronger framework. So what I did was I integrated it into a ceremony. I made a ceremony out of it. When I first learned it, it was literally in a class and we were just doing the drawing, and it was just like, yeah, okay, you drew all these circles and now go your way. And because I had such a strong experience with it, I wanted to have a space that is enclosed, where I open the space, I go into my process, and I close the space afterwards. Because this was something that I kind of struggled with, because literally, I mean, I couldn't sleep. I was like, really just almost caught up in all the stories so much that it was, I needed a way to like stop it in a way, you know, to be like, okay, thank you, ancestors. Thank you for all the knowledge. Like, you know, I would like to just have a normal day now. And so I wanted to bring that in. And that was last year in autumn that I planned the first workshop. And then 2 weeks before that happened, my grandmother passed away in Germany. And I couldn't go to the funeral because of all the things that happened. There was no traveling possible. And I started using the art to like say goodbye in a way, to find a way for myself to process this loss that I was experiencing, and to find a way to, in a way, like support my grandmother in her journey to join the ancestors. So that was what, in the end, in this very first workshop that I did, I worked with my grandmother. And it's really interesting. I can show you the picture later. I mostly draw intuitive. I don't like check who is who in my picture, but I look at it afterwards. And when I looked at the picture afterwards, I could see, like, how would you call, like, I invited in an ancestor that was beyond those 7 generations as a guide. Because in a way, when we think about those 7 generations, those are the ancestors that are directly connected with us and that can influence our lives in a way. And if we go beyond that, we can actually access ancestors that are oftentimes better guides, because all of those people, they still have stories that I might play out in my life. Positive, negative, however, you know, I might have talents from them, I might have fears from them or something like that. And when I go beyond that, I can actually find an ancestor that is completely luminescent, that is like this guiding light for me. That was like my imagery. And in my drawing, she is directly connected to that outside ancestor. So she was like, in a way, I felt that in the end, the drawing was really there to guide her into her place in this mandala in a way, and to really bring harmony, because this is like what we're doing, to bring harmony into this relationship. So that was where I started. And then in the moment, the first days when I actually learned about my grandma passing, I did another process that I shared in our ancestral program together, and that was a portrait. I had a portrait of my grandma. It was already prepared to be drawn. I didn't do it in my classes because I also had the feeling that this needs more time. And then when she passed, I knew that it was the moment to draw this portrait. And it is a practice where we draw on top of the picture of someone. So it's like something that's already there. So basically, to work with it, you kind of need to have an ancestor that's remembered, that you have a picture of, and then you explore and connect with the ancestors through the drawing process. And when I did that first drawing, it took like a week. It took like 3 or 4 days, I think, several days I was drawing on it. And it was like a ceremony. It was my ceremony for her. And of course, I would like candles, and I had like a little cup of coffee for her and some cake for her. And then I was drawing, and then I put the drawing there, and I was just sitting and watching and talking to her. So it was really like this way for me to go through this process of letting go of her. And so the picture gets layer by layer by layer by layer. And in the end, it was really like she was like dissolving in the picture. She was dissolving in like the ocean and the rainbow and the clouds. And it became very mystical in a way. And that helped me to understand that she was in a different world, that she was like moving on somewhere else. And it was very healing. And I felt very connected to her, even though I couldn't have any of the like usual funeral rites that you would have. No, I couldn't like be with my family, talk to I could talk to them, but I couldn't hug my dad, but I had my own way of saying goodbye. And I think like this is where I really understood that this has a great healing potential, that kind of work with the ancestors, with the drawing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, can give testimony to that as well. That was one of the things that I was really looking forward to in our series, because my grandmother also recently passed away, and she actually passed away in just a couple of months, or maybe even just a few weeks before we were going to be doing this ancestral healing series. And I had worked a lot with the writing process to connect with specific ancestors. And actually, my grandmother had been a person that I talked about a lot with about my ancestry. She would tell stories about her mother and her grandmother. And, there were a lot of immigration stories and, just the adventures of my ancestors on her side of the family. And she had photographs of folks that I might want to do more of these kinds of drawings with. But she had passed away just a few weeks before, and my mother had captured a photograph of my grandmother right at the moment of her passing, because it was such a striking moment. My grandmother, the last couple of hours of her life, she was in a semi-comatose state. She had been suffering from Alzheimer's for a period of time, and she was really healthy otherwise. And we thought that she was going to be, living for a while. And we set her up in a home because she needed more care than the family could offer her. But one day she woke up and she wasn't eating, and she kind of slipped into this semi-comatose state, and she had a do not resuscitate end of life plan. So they called my mom in, and she sat with her, and some other family members were able to come for a visit. I was not able to come for a visit, but I was able to sing my grandmother a song over the phone in the last couple of hours while she was in this state. And then my mom shared how she looked like she was wrestling with her demons for the last 2 hours of her life. And then suddenly this great peace came over her, and all of her wrinkles in her face just melted away, and she passed. And my mom captured this photo of this peaceful state that came over her. And it was such a powerful process to feel. And so I took this photo and brought it to this workshop, and it was very intense. And I didn't really understand why. I remember doing the drawing process with you, and I had to leave early because I got to this point where I was like, okay, I'm done. I need to be done with this process and remove myself from the energy of the process. Like, I got to a very clear done mark. And I would normally want to stay with the drawing process the whole time, but it was really intense. And then the next day in the writing, or no, maybe it wasn't the next day, but when we did the writing about it, it was very clear. The writing helped to clarify and help me to understand what was so intense about it, in that the drawing process was helping my grandmother to, helping the healing process of a bunch of different things that had been going on with my grandmother in the last months of her life, where the Alzheimer's was dissolving the ways that she had kept early wounding, like early traumas, contained within her and unaddressed. And the Alzheimer's was making it less and less possible to do that, so that she was, basically reconnecting with early childhood, severe trauma from early childhood that she had never addressed in her entire life, that she had kept buried her entire life. And I was connecting to the energy of her wrestling with that in the last hours of her life, and finding peace with that, and helping with that process through the drawing and through the writing. And then also, I was able to bear witness to her spirit's reunification with her husband, who she'd been grieving the death of for over 20 years. And longing to be like for 6 years after he died, she told me that she lived to go to sleep at night so she could be with him in her dreams. I mean, they were that close and that connected, and he died way earlier than anyone anticipated him to die. And so, there was this sense of the peace was about this reunification with him in spirit. And, I do have a sense that our ancestors are living entities outside of us, as well as the sense that we have inside of us aspects of our ancestry that we can work with inside of us. And I also have that sense of our ancestors being outside of us. So I was both working on the healing process inside of me around those traumas that get passed down, right? Her early childhood trauma got passed down, that the way that her body responds to that and packaged that away got passed down to my mother and got passed down to me. And so I was working that healing process inside myself through the drawing and the writing, as well as for her spirit, with her spirit, like we did it together. And so it was a really powerful, beautiful process to combine this drawing with the writing. And I'd love to see, would you be willing to show your grandmother's picture that you drew? And I remember last time you showed sort of a progression from when you started the picture and then it progressed, and you could see the dissolution, the dissolving that you talked about when you shared about it.
Yeah, I can actually share all the pictures that I took. I mean, I just took photos like every now and then in between. Whenever I thought that like some part of my process was over or something. I don't know. I don't even remember.
Yeah.
Like at some point I took a picture. So I can share the process, definitely.
And you can put it on shared screen. There we go.
Okay, so this is the original photograph that I had of my grandma. And I really like that she was a young woman then. And I kind of had this connection with her where I could, even in this picture already, I could see like part of myself in it. This is why I choose it. Oh, can I do this? Oh yeah, I can. Okay. And then to prepare it for the drawing though, you have to kind of make it super light. So that you can draw on top of it. And of course, I didn't draw on top of the original. I draw on top of a copy. This was the first stage. So that was like one day of drawing where I just went, and it was a very delicate process. It always is with people, and especially with ancestors, especially with someone who just passed, I think. But that was basically me exploring the shapes. So you see a lot of like exploring the outside, and then you very slowly, very gently go into and like look at the features. And then, you know, little things like this can happen, like something appeared. I kind of gave her like this, I don't know.
Adornment, it almost looks
adornment. Yeah, that's good. And then this first picture is also very light colored. So in the first one, really, I felt that that was like as far as I could go. And then I slept a night and I put it up in the morning again, and I decided to continue. So this first one is a little bit like a getting to know each other. And this one was really where I started seeing myself in the drawing, and where I had a lot of memories with her. No, this was the one that brought up childhood memories of me and my grandma and what we used to do together, and like really how the place that she had in my life. That's like, that was kind of like the story of this first drawing. So the next day I kept drawing, and first I did more lines. I don't know why I started with the eyes, was kind of like the place to start. This is like one of the things, like in a drawing like that, I would always let my intuition guide me. You know, if I have the feeling, okay, there need to be more lines there, I go with that. And I see how it unfolds, and I look at what happens and where it takes me. And this one really slowly took me to a place where she turned from my grandma into this archetype in a way. No, she became like the queen and the head of my family, and she became like something beyond the person, some kind of role that she was playing. No, and these kind of pictures for me had all the different roles in it, all the like things that she also, the roles she was playing for me, but also for other people. And then with this, I started to slowly dissolve, especially when you work with the face. Once you start dissolving the face, it's a little bit like dissolving the personality. And this is not to like make her go away or something like that. This was for me to let her go. This was my process of starting to let her go. So I allowed this to dissolve slowly. And then this was, I think, the end of the second day. I saw spirits, like all these circles, they were spirits in the drawing, and she had these eyes that were kind of looking beyond. And this was the picture that made me understand that she is in the process of going somewhere beyond. She was going into a different world, and I could make this world tangible for me in this picture. And like, you know, I could experience it. I could see all these, and I was like, wow, you know, this is maybe her family, and it's her sisters, her mom and dad, her husband, like everyone that she lost in her life, that she's going to be reunited with. And she was kind of also, because she was kind of looking far, it really had this feeling for me that she's kind of slowly fading away, but not in a way that I'm going to lose her, but in a way that I see, okay, she's going somewhere. And I think that was really comforting for me, just knowing that it's not just her disappearing, but also her finding something else, that in a way there's something after this. Oh, this is just the light better. And then the next day I started with colors. So first I actually drew the ocean, because I kind of had this feeling of like this, the ocean of souls, and she was kind of like going towards the ocean, and there's clouds in her hair. And it made me realize that in the moment when she died, or like the time now, she's also communing in a way with the earth again. No, like we all become earth again. And so I think, like, for me, I'm kind of like a water person, so it made perfect sense for me. All this water stuff was in there. I think my grandma wasn't such a water person, so this is more like my personality in the picture. But yeah, so that was for me, I think, really about starting to let go, starting to be like okay with it, you know. And the further I went, like this is where the rainbow started, and like now really, you know, the face is almost gone. It's like a whole different feeling. The person actually is not there anymore. It's more like a, I don't know, like an elemental being or something like this.
Yeah, it even looks like there's these mountains and this waterfall coming down and a river coming down through the face into the ocean.
Yeah. So in a way, it had like all this, how do you say, all the symbolism in it. No, and of course, it's symbolism that I read about maybe, or that I kind of subconsciously had in my mind. But it was whatever came out, and every part, like every step in the drawing, oops, you know, I did something. Every step in the drawing brought me closer to understanding and letting her go into this different sphere. And in the end, like my when I looked at it in the end, I kind of had the feeling that she is now everywhere. She is in the clouds, she's in the ocean, she's in the river, she's in the rainbow, and I can find her there. Mm-hmm. And that was such a comforting thought for me. That really made me feel so good that I can, you know, I just have to look in the clouds and my grandma's going to be there. So yeah, for me, that was a deep, deep, deep personal process. Of course, you know, you can't do that in like one day. Obviously, right. That is something that really takes time. But yeah, mostly, I mean, where we went with our workshop was like the first stage. Yeah, like getting to know and getting in touch, and then you can keep working with it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was this process.
Beautiful. Well, you know, I'm realizing that one step that I didn't understand when we did the process was the making the copy of the photo light.
Yeah. I know.
So that, I think, kind of limited my drawing, although you can see this is the one that I did with my grandmother, but the photo, the printout that I did of the photo was too dark really to go through that whole dissolution phase. But it's still such a new thing. I'm still processing so much of, you know, I feel like, oh, now I can do another phase of working with this photo, and perhaps even some of the photos of other ancestors in the lineage, like getting, you know, I have photos of my great grandmother and my great great grandmother, and you know, working with that, as you know, is more and more appealing. Every time you show me the series from your grandmother, I'm like, oh yeah, I want to do that one again. And for me, the combination with the writing, because the writing process then allows me to understand what happened. Like you're able to describe, and I'm sure I would too if I had a process like that, but writing that down, you know, gives space for that understanding. So I really enjoy the combination.
Yeah, me too. I can definitely say that for me, the writing actually made it even a little bit deeper. I mean, with this process, because I spent so much time, I think it's just, I remember all of that. And also because it was the first time I did it. But the one that we did together, I actually made a drawing of my grandfather that I haven't met. Is my father's father. And It's my one like grandparent that he passed away long before I was born. And I never had any connection at all to him. But at some point in the drawings before, I realized that I really want to connect with him. I really want to know this person. And it was very interesting because I can maybe show that picture too. I mean, that's just one picture.
Mhm.
Let me start that one. No, sorry, not yet. First. There. It was like a very interesting picture for me that came out. There we go. Okay, here. So this is the picture of my grandfather.
Yes.
And it was very like, in a way, kind of when I first looked at it, I thought, what is all this? Why is there this thing in his face? You know, it's kind of like, it's not a pretty picture, you know, and it's really also not about that. But it's about all of this can kind of have a message for me. And with the writing, I really dove into that. I dove into what this line means, what, you know, what is behind all of this, behind the symbolism. And for me, it really helped me to kind of find ways to describe it and to really understand it in a way that comes back to my mind, where I can actually grasp it with my mind. When I look at this drawing, it tells me something, but it's in such a way, it's like in a way, it's like in a hidden way. Oh, it's like, I know there's all this knowledge and I can kind of feel things and I have like imagery and stuff. But the writing really brings it back to where I can integrate it. Back to like everyday life in a way, almost, you know, where I can be like, okay, I've learned something from my grandfather and I can name it. And interestingly, really, like when I look at it now, when I look at all my grandparents' connections, there was always a part that I never knew where it came from, you know, part of myself that has to do with spirituality a lot. And the more I drew several pictures where he was in it in some way, you know, and I realized that this kind of, there would always come colors, for example, it would always be kind of bluish and purplish, things that are very spiritual for me, or that I interpret as spiritual. And so in a way, I can, you know, create this connection and I can look deeper into it and I can understand my own spirituality and why my spirituality needed so much time to even develop, because it was kind of cut off of it for a long time. So yeah, it can bring up things that you would not expect. I can definitely promise that. And especially with the writing, then it helps to make it understandable in an everyday life way. You know, once we bring it into words, we can kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing about your experience with the writing. That's definitely true for me. And I wanted to bring up a topic that came up for us as we were creating the course together, and that has been something that I've been exploring in all the ancestral healing work that I've done, is how to connect with our ancestry in a way that feels safe enough to allow the kind of in-depth connection that we're talking about. Because a lot of people, when I talk to them about ancestral healing, the concern that comes up, and even, you know, sometimes in a workshop, the concern that comes up is, I couldn't connect with this ancestor, or it didn't feel safe to connect with this ancestor, or I was frightened. I was afraid to, and so I just felt frightened, and so I couldn't proceed with the process. And I just want to say I just want to normalize that experience with ancestral healing work, and just speak to the truth of the matter, which is that many of us have ancestors that were not very nice people. and that their spirits might be very troubled, and that it doesn't feel safe for us to connect either with their spirit, if we believe in their spirit existing and being alive outside of us and still being very unwell. And it doesn't feel safe to connect with that part of us that may be influenced by or wounded by, or even a remnant of that unwellness that resides in us that we may kind of keep contained or to the side or buried, right? It doesn't feel safe to connect with those aspects. And so there's ways that I weave into the writing process. And you mentioned some of the ways that you do, Antje, that are really helpful with that is, for example, having a more ancient ancestral guide. Like I can see in your mandala here behind you, you have that circle of the seventh generation, and then there's several circles outside of that. I think you pointed to those before. And I do a similar thing in my ancestral healing meditations, where we call upon a well of spirit, ancient ancestor, who can sort of guide us and contain the dangerous or frightening or unwell energy patterns and spirits of those ancestors, whether that's inside of our own inner reality or, outside in the spirit realm, so that we're not in danger of having damaging influences on our lives and in our bodies from the memories or the spirits of those ancestors. And so I just wanted to speak to that in case some of you listening are going, yeah, I don't know if I really want to connect with some of my ancestors. I mean, do I really want to even include them in that mandala? And I just want to normalize that feeling of trepidation, because when you start getting back to that, that's a lot of ancestors in that circle. There's some of them we might not want to have anything to do with, and so I just want to normalize that. I mean, our human history is full of very, wonderful people and also not nice people. And then there's also the people that maybe were very kind and wonderful themselves, but really terrible things happened to them that is hard to connect with as well. And that might not feel very safe to be reaching for a connection with someone who's still very unwell because of whatever horrible thing. And sometimes it's the combination of something horrible happens to somebody and then they become a horrible person that's just spilling that pain all over everyone in their lives, right? And so it's like we've got enough people like that are living in our world today. Why do we? But the truth is, my perspective on that is that the reason why so many people are doing horrible things today is because there's so much of that history that we try to sweep under the rug, but it's still this pile of pain underneath the rug that we're all carrying around with us. And that until we address that and bring healing to that and find pathways to well-being in our own realm and in the spiritual realms, we're just going to keep spilling out that pain no matter how much we try to sweep it under the rug and say it's in the past. And that's like what happened with my grandmother. Her whole life, all the structures of her life, the way she lived her life, bless her, is that she swept anything painful from the past under the rug and said, that's in the past, I'm living for now. But she wasn't really living for now, because all this energy, she had to use a whole ton of her energy to keep that unresolved hurt from her past buried. It took a ton of energy. And as she got older and had less and less energy, it was seeping out even before she got older and had less energy. It was spilling out all over the place in ways that she was in denial of, and as she got older, she was less capable of being in denial about it, although she still was. And that was contributing to her delusional experiences, suffering from Alzheimer's and like that. And so for me, all of this awareness of the influence that our ancestors have on us, both from within and from the spirit realm, it really motivates me to tend to these relationships. But doing so, it's really important to remember to do so and to learn how to do so in a way that feels safe, that feels like we're not putting ourselves in too much danger, like increasing that feels like we can proceed and not be re-traumatizing ourselves. And so, I just wanted to speak to that because it's very, that's a common response I hear when I talk about ancestral healing and who wants to engage in ancestral healing. It's like, not me. I don't want to have anything to do with some of my ancestors. So be curious to hear your feelings around all that, Antje.
I think for me, once I got to see my 7 generations around me, I realized that I am connected and there is no way of me cutting these connections. It's impossible. And so the choice I have is to look at the stories and to try in the best way that I can to bring healing to that and to bring healing to these parts of myself that suffer from my ancestral patterns or imprints or whatever. I think for me, that's the part where this including everything into a ceremony, giving it a framework, giving it a space that is closed, that is safe. And this is why, we always start with a ceremony. I always start with smoking my room, smoking myself, cleansing myself in some way, preparing myself mentally and emotionally, and even the physical space. I clean up my space. I set up an altar. I give this a lot of attention. I don't do it quickly on the side ever. No, this is something where you decide to engage into that now for a certain time, and then you close the door back on it. And I think this closing the door back on it is very important too, to give it a closure, to say to yourself and to your ancestors that now I've done enough for now, because you can't solve everyone's problems. And not quickly, for sure. What I realized in some of my drawings, I can actually show some of my mandala drawings maybe, because there's some very interesting patterns that I found when I first started drawing those. So here, this was my very, very first mandala. So you see, it's the big circle in the middle, and then all of these circles. And what I realized pretty quickly is that I found lineages that I had to work through. During this drawing process, I had the craziest experiences. I had heart palpitations. I had to slow down because it was so intense. I got sick, sick to the stomach. I had pains in my body and things like that. And some of the circles that you see here, I had to stay with them for a certain time. And this was to process some kind of experience, something that I felt when I touched these circles. And here, for example, I went from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And whenever I did something like that, I felt the symptoms that I had recede. Like my body would feel more relaxed. The fear that I felt would get less. So that for me kind of helped me understand that a lot of the imprints that we can feel, they go through generations. It's not one ancestor that brings you that. Most of the time, it's already in a lineage. It's already been going from one to the next, the next, the next, to next. And then at some point it lands with you. And at some point, maybe you have a problem with it or not, or maybe it can also be gifts. It can also be the good things.
Right.
So that was one thing that I've really learned just from experiencing that. And then the colors here, we work with the chakra colors. And actually the way that my teacher did it, I can maybe show the next picture, is like this, no, starting with red in the middle, then orange, then yellow, then green. But in this very first drawing, I intuitively used the chakra colors to explore the drawing more. And they showed me what these patterns had to do with my imprint, like where does it go? Like this, for example, is something that has to do something with my spirituality, and it goes through this line and then comes to me. And here is something that has to do with my personal powers. So that was a way for me to really understand my own patterns better. And to really see that, oh, okay, I have like certain fears or something like this. I mean, like in this process, really, I had all kinds of visions and all kinds of stuff. I should have probably wrote much more. That's one of the things that I kind of regret now, you know, that I didn't have the writing process to go with it, because I don't remember every single thought that I had here, every single insight. If I'd wrote it down, then this would be much richer even for me to understand that. But yeah. So that was the way that and this is the way that I like to share it as well. I use the colors very intuitively in the drawing, just where they go. I'm gonna skip this one here. This was the one I did after my grandma passed. And here you can see it's really nice. Here's my grandma. And here is this outside ancestor that I invoked. And I made this connection without even realizing that she was here. I had no idea. And so like in the drawing, I could see it, you know, and it made me feel really, it comforted me to see that connection, to see that she is guided, you know, I don't have to worry about her. That's what the picture told me, you know. I was like, okay, you know, she's fine. She's like connected with some of her ancestors, and she's like connected to the spirit outside there. It's gonna bring her into her place, and it's all gonna be fine. And so actually in this drawing, I had to work on other things. No, it's like when you do a drawing like that, you never really know where you end up. This is really something that I love about the process. Every drawing is different, but I'm sure like if I looked at all my drawings in a row, I could probably see ancestors that need more, like just have greater needs, for example, no, that I have to go back to in several consecutive drawings again and again and again. And then the colors can tell me what needs to happen there. No, it can tell me also what I may have to heal in myself, what I may have to just concentrate on in my everyday life, for example. No, it can go back into everyday life. And you can like have all these insights through a drawing like that. And even if, I mean, here I didn't touch every single one, no, a lot of them, they're just there in the drawing, but I didn't actually connect with them. But even a process like this, it was a good process, you know, like I definitely learned something, and I healed some part of myself, and I had some insight that I took back out.
And I see you on these last two drawings, you captured that you placed a crystal on that guiding wisdom ancestor. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was something that actually kind of just happened when I did the first ceremony that I shared. I had an ancestral crystal that I had worked with before. And in my meditation, I just had this thought of, okay, cool, I can just, because it came actually when I was feeling into, do I want the ancestor that guides me, do I want him to come into my body and guide me through there, or do I want to just be able to hold on to him but have him outside of my body? That was kind of like where I thought, okay, when I bring him into a crystal, I can connect to the crystal, but he can be in this separate entity. And then also whenever I use the crystal now, I get much faster access because I created this connection before. So it's really, I have this one crystal, it's my ancestral crystal. And whenever I do ancestor work, I come back to the crystal and I have it in my drawings. I use it with my drawings. I use it in my meditations. And it's become a very interesting tool. And that kind of happened like intuitively, really. I didn't like read anything about ancestral crystals or something like that. I just started doing that, and it made a lot of sense to me, and it felt really good. And I think this is like something that I like to teach with the drawing process as well, that we're looking for and we're moving towards the sensations that are comfortable. So we will also, of course, experience sensations, especially in a drawing like this. You know, you may touch an ancestor and it may feel terrible. You know, like one of those circles may really bring you fear or make you angry, or, you know, bring up feelings that you really don't want. And then we can find ways to bring healing through the drawing. We can use with colors. For example, if I feel like it's really hot or something like that, you know, it's uncomfortable for me, then I will bring a cool color in and I will remedy the feeling that I had in my drawing. And by doing that, I think that subconsciously you also always bring some kind of energy into your field, you know, into your like into your field, into your being, that will support you in that. So what we try with the drawing is always to find the way how we can be supported. So it's not just looking at all the terrible things and be like, oh my God, it's also terrible. We also try to find ways of making it comfortable, more comfortable for us. Not that it's really easy. And I mean, one of the things that I heard from several participants, especially with that drawing, was that there can be a lot of dark energy because we come from places where, in the past, a lot of terrible things happened to people and were committed by people. So there is going to be, and I can promise you, there is going to be terrible ancestors, but there's also going to be beautiful ancestors in there for everyone. Like it's 254, I think. So in 254 people, there was one good person for sure. There was definitely also one terrible person, probably.
Yeah, I'm glad you.
It's.
I just want to mention that was a big turning point for me to be able to engage more in my ancestral healing process, was the recognition that I wasn't just looking for the painful moments in my ancestry, because if we get too focused on that, it can become quickly overwhelming and we kind of want to start to avoid it, right? But one of my healing mentors at a certain point said, what if part of, half of this process at least is about celebrating and reclaiming and receiving the benefits of the wisdom and the strengths and the gifts of the ancestors. And, that crystal is just such a great embodiment of that. And I could see intuitively, I'm like, oh, I want to bring my whole bag of crystals and have each, ancestor that could be, could take up residence in a particular crystal as well, as well as the circles on the page, and could be, and then in particular crystals, or even I could get really messy if I'm starting to drop flower essences or things like that onto the paper, but maybe a flower itself, right? Like just a dried flower or some herb, pieces of herbs or medicinal herbs, in their dried form could be placed on the paper. And just whole processes like that, or even glued to, the paper. My art tends to, yes, that's what I'm talking about. Okay. Yeah. There she went, crazy with the crystals. Yes, and shells I see too. Did anything get glued on here, or was this just a temporary installment?
Yeah, that was temporary. That was actually, the drawing was also on a full moon. So I put the picture out into the moonlight with a bunch of crystals on there. And this is like, I just want to maybe talk a little bit about what we can do with those pictures afterwards, because that's like something that I also find really like awesome in creating these artworks, is that you have an artifact. You have like this representation of your ancestry, and you can use it in ceremony afterwards. You can put it on your altar. You can put crystals on it like this. I here put some flowers around it. So you can, you can like play with it. And this is something that I completely intuitively did. I was like, and I just had these shells and it made sense for me. Like the shells are again like surrounding my grandma and helping her to go and, float in her ocean. And I did, for example, here is my little altar that I had set up when I made this drawing. And this is the drawing that I made of my grandma before. So she was there, and so this is ways that we can use the drawings there. I had that for a while in my room, like just a little altar for her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really beautiful to do that with your own artwork, to use your own artwork in that, and to make it all into ceremony. And then every time I see the picture, all of this is in it. The whole, like every time I light a candle, like there is so much energy in it that this picture now holds for me.
Beautiful.
That is, for me, it's more personal than a photo of her. Even, because not because I created it, but because it was kind of like our co-creation in a way. It's like her and me together. It's not us as separate entities, but it's her and me. This is how I see those pictures.
It feels so beautiful because it's like as she's included in these ongoing drawing and writing processes, it's like we're getting to know. I feel like in some of the writing processes and in these drawing processes that I'm exploring more and more, I'm getting to know these ancestors more and more as I engage with these processes, and like I'm knowing more about them and receiving more of their wisdom and gifts and contributing more and participating more in the healing process that we're going to together as a family. And that there's actually, one of the things that I've experienced when people pass away is that there's this accessibility to greater intimacy when we are not separated by the boundaries of our physical form, right? It's so very easy to feel like, oh, if they're not in the physical space with me, if I can't touch their physical body, then I can't connect with them. But actually, my experience has been that oftentimes that physical form can feel like a limitation into how deeply we can connect, right? And they have, in physical form, we can get very ossified, if you will, into our perspectives and our ways of seeing things. And if somebody sees something differently than me, then that's even more separation. And being in this physical realm and with everything going on with humanity, it's very easy to have limitations on how deeply we can connect. And what I've discovered, as like when my grandmother passed away and when my grandmother passed away and other people that have passed away, those physical limitations are now gone, and I can really connect more deeply with their spirit and with their essence. And the writing process, and of course this drawing process too, really facilitates that. So that's such a healing thing when we're talking about the passing of a loved one, to be able to claim the gift that is intrinsic in that passing. And so many people feel like, especially if it's a close loved one, that, oh, that person is gone. And it's very hard to connect with what I'm saying, which is they're actually more here than they were before. And so these practices of like having a physical drawing that feels so intimately representative of that energetic connection that can be so ephemeral and easy to get distracted from and not connect with because we're busy with our day-to-day lives, that I feel like that having that physical drawing, doing ceremony with that physical drawing, having that, writing that we can go back and read and reflect on again, that helps us to cultivate and sustain and keep that relationship going and receive the increased depth of intimacy available. So I'm just celebrating that with you and what you've shared with us. Yay, little finger jingles. Anything else you might like to share around that?
I think like what just came up for me is that when I made those drawings, the drawing process it goes so deep into myself that I automatically open up deeper as well. So I started opening up to actually receive messages. Like before I even started any of that, I was not really open to receive any messages from my ancestors. And I think this is really something that all these processes can help with too. They make you more receptive. And of course, I mean, you can, close down again if you want to. But for me, it was really, enriching my life to open up to it.
Yeah.
Because I feel like now my grandma is kind of like my patron in a way. Especially for my art and all these things. And she's like there in my art room in this picture. And I dedicate a lot of my work to her. So it, and whenever, I feel like, oh, I want to give up or something, she's there to encourage me. And of course, these are all processes that happen inside of me, but having her there and having this thing that I created that shows my connection to her, and also shows for me personally the gifts that I receive from her. That like the drawings that I made with her, they made me very aware of what parts of my personality I share with my grandmother. And those were things that I never thought of before. I didn't sit down and think of, okay, which part of me is part of my grandmother too? But when I did this drawing process, things like that just came up. I just realized, I just looked at it and I was like, wow, of course, like she loved to dance and sing and all of that. So a big part of my creative being has to do with my grandma. It was opened for me because of the person that she was, and because of the person that she was in my life, the roles that she played in my life. And I think we can look at those kind of things even beyond the ancestors that we know. Like if you have an interest in something that nobody else in your family is interested in, like you're into herbs and you have this super like strong connection, or into stones or who knows what, like all of these little things. It can come from an ancestor. There can be a connection in your ancestry. And once you find that connection, and even if, you don't have to pinpoint, don't have to say in my mandala, it's this one person, but just as in a way, like an energy flow, a flow of knowledge coming through you, you can open that channel more so that more of knowledge, for example, can pass through. And I think that all these processes, the writing, the drawing, moving, dancing, whatever, singing, all of that can help us with that and can open us up to receive more from this realm, from this kind of something beyond ourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for all the inspiration around all of that, and for sharing your inspiration with all of that. I'm really feeling that inspiration myself, especially this time of year as we're coming up on autumn and into the winter time, when these kinds of connections feel more available. That many of our cultural lineages have time at this time of year when we're connecting with the ancestors, and so there seems to be a seasonal feeling of closeness with the ancestry, especially as we're coming into October and the solstice, the fall equinox and the winter solstice. So these are wonderful practices to bring into that season, right? As we're going into the season of at least here in the Northern Hemisphere, of having, more hours of darkness in our day where we're lighting candles more perhaps, or, having decorative lights. And so perhaps we can all consider including these kinds of connected, intimate connections with our ancestry into our home decor, which is something that folks get into this time of year, and in our celebratory meals and food making. If we think about Halloween, the origins of Halloween was putting treats out for the ancestors. That's what it was. And this is an ancient practice that is still alive today, even in American culture, where a lot of the spiritual significance of these practices has been lost or stripped away. We can still feel the remnants of those practices, and we can reclaim the richness and the intimacy. It's not just about buying bags and bags of candy and cheap, costumes, but it's more about how can we have an ongoing, nurtured relationship. So can we create special foods, cook special foods, and make offerings of those foods and beverages, and share with our ancestors as though, they're here in the room celebrating with us, right? And like a friend. And we can cultivate that kind of relationship just like we would with a friend who's in physical form, but the ancestor might not be in physical form, or they may be residing inside of us in our own memory, but like creating a special food and a special place for them, in the room, in the space. Really helps to cultivate that relationship. And we can create, like I loved what you were saying about cleaning up the room, and as though you were welcoming a guest, right? And so when we do that, that's such a celebration, and making time for that in our lives is a powerful way to disrupt some of the damaging cultural erasure that so much of us suffer from, so many of us suffer from, where it's just supposed to be all about working and then working some more, and forget resting, forget celebrating, forget connecting, forget intimate human connection, forget community. It's like, oh, no, thank you. Let's reclaim a culture of connectedness and community and connection with the spiritual realms and connection with our ancestors, and wisdom being passed down and healing being shared and created, and, celebratory foods and shared with each other in a loving way, and all of that. Okay, we got me going now. Of how we can enter into the upcoming holiday season with this sense of love and community and communion, not only with each other and our living relatives, but our ancestral relatives as well, and all living beings, right? Making special food for your pets, for your animals, and those animals and pets that have passed on, and bringing an offering to the creek or the river or the source of water nearby, and celebrating the water, and, making celebratory offerings to the moon and to the trees and the plants outside. And now we're really going here, right? If we're all, if everything is a relative and part of this wholeness of life, then the tree outside is a relative and has an ancestry and all of that. So there we go. Now we're expanding and including everyone. Perhaps that influences what more options for what we do with these drawings, right? Bring it out and hang it on the tree, or
Great. Yeah. It's nice that you brought that up, because that is kind of like the beginning of my ancestral series. Like the roots drawing for me is really about that. It's about looking at all the ways we can, all the ways that we can connect, and we can root in the world, and that can go beyond our physical ancestry.
Yeah.
So
So
that's like the one that we're going to start with.
yeah, I can show mine that I did. And as you were saying that, I'm seeing that this big circle looks like the whole planet right there.
Oh, see, right?
I hadn't seen that before until you just said that, and I pulled it out to show. I'm like, oh, wait a second. What is she saying? That's that right there, right? Beautiful. All right. So do you have the details? Can you share the details of how folks can sign up for this series, when it starts, what it's going to be composed of?
It will be 4 meetings, and you can come, like you can book each one separate, or have a package for all of them. The first one is on October 2nd and will be Roots. And that is, in a way, for me, an introduction where we look at being rooted, being connected to ancestry, just in a very general sense. And I really like to start with that because, it lets us start in a broader space that is not completely only focused on our blood ancestry, whereas all the other processes will go into the blood ancestry. But I kind of feel that before that, it's nice to become aware that we are connected to more than that. Our blood ancestry is not our only ancestry, and we can connect to and kind of receive energy from trees, for example, or nature, and all these other realms as well. And I think it's nice to kind of bring that up before we go more into the blood ancestry, because the blood ancestry, as we talked about, can be heavy processes as well. So after that, we will have, wait, I check my calendar here, so I'm telling it all right. On October 9th, we're going to do the mandala, the one that we talked about. And that, maybe I should talk about that first. Each workshop takes 2.5 hours, because we go through a meditation, a little ceremony in the beginning and in the end, to just frame the work and to create a space of safety, of security, of comfort. And I, of course, invite everyone to create a space around themselves that they need for that. But this is one of the reasons why it's taking long. But I can promise the time flies. I can definitely say that. So in the second one, we go into this big mandala. And so in that picture, we look at the entirety of our ancestry over 7 generations. So we look 7 generations in the past. And this is really one that you can work on for weeks. So it's all of these drawings can be a starting point for further exploration. They will probably not be finished after the first meeting, but I will take you through the entire process, and you can get back to it. And also you will receive a recording. So if you want to get back to it with guidance, you can just come back to the recording. The third drawing that we will do is on October 16th. All of them are Saturdays, by the way. And that one will go a little bit more specific into our 4 main bloodlines, meaning started from our parents, so mother and father. We go into the mother and father lineage of each of them. So we go into your father's fathers, 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 your mother's mothers, mothers. And so we explore those 4 lines because they are often very important and have a very strong influence on us. So especially, I mean, for women, I feel, for example, for me, my mother's line is the line that I'm exploring right now, and that I feel I need to go into healing there right now. So you can choose, of course, you don't have to explore every line, especially If there are ancestors that you don't want to connect with right now, you don't feel ready, for example, then you can explore as much as you want. But that is like the next one that we do. And it's a very simple drawing, actually, that I'm still kind of developing further. And it's very intuitive, and it really feels into how can we harmonize those four. Yeah, there you go. See, yeah, so you got three.
I didn't explore this one at all, but I did explore these lines there.
Yeah, so we go into that, and then the last one that we do on October 23rd will be the portrait. And that's where we choose an ancestor that is known, that is remembered, that you have pictures of in some way. And then we work with the picture. And yeah, there are 4 Saturdays, starting at 11 a.m. I kind of thought that was a comfortable time. And I think in theory, it's also possible to join from Europe. Shouldn't be too late.
Not too late, 11. And there will also be the opportunity on Sundays at 11 to join the Writing from the Womb workshop. We're still working out the details, but that's when it will be. And so that's something you can add to your workshop. Your drawing process is to then come the next day and go into a writing process around it.
Yeah, and I think that's really like a nice combination to do. So you can draw on Saturday and spend your however much time you want to spend with it, and then go back to it. And with the writing process, the way that we experienced it when we did it last time is that not every writing actually has to do exactly with the drawing that you're doing. It's just another way to open up to whatever comes through. So yeah. But of course, you can bring your drawing and it will trigger something. Something will come up most of the time that you can then bring into writing. And I kind of felt that it would be nice to have them pretty much close together so that you're still in the process.
Yeah.
You're still going to completely remember what you did yesterday, and then you can go into the writing. So to sign up, you can go to my website. It is neuroartproject.net. And I think I have a button on the main page, but if you want to go straight to the ancestral arts, then it's /ancestral arts. But we can probably put a link somewhere.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the description here. And so you'll be able to look for that and find your way there. So thank you so much, Antje. And I'm realizing that this was a very long episode. I was a little bit confused about the time. I kept looking at the clock going, oh, we got plenty of time. And now I'm realizing, wow, we've been here for a while. I guess we're really passionate about this topic. We can just wrap it up by saying that listeners also know that if you're interested in learning more about what's happening at the Womb-Centered Healing Temple, you can go to wombcenteredhealing.com and subscribe to the newsletter, and you'll get announcements about other podcast episodes. And if you've signed up for this Ancestral Healing series, keep an eye out for emails about more episodes in this particular series. So we look forward to talking with you more, connecting with you more about ancestral healing, and perhaps seeing you in these upcoming workshops. All right. Thanks so much. That's all for now. Until next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.